She was once on the reality show Paternity Court, trying to figure out who the father was of one of her children. This image is per Paternity Court's YouTube channel. Now, this mom is accused of the unthinkable, allegedly shooting 4 of her kids, killing 2 of them. What we're learning about her past from her time on Paternity Court to what she said about parenting just a couple of weeks ago. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Before I get into what this mom allegedly has been saying on social media about parenting and her time on that reality television show, I want to break down with you the horrifying scene that law enforcement in Texas say they came upon on Saturday of last week. It was October 4th. Police say they were called to this gas station in Brazoria County, Texas. That's south of Houston. It was around 5 o'clock in the morning. The 911 caller, they say, was Oninda Romelus. Deputies said that they didn't know why they were responding to this gas station, but when they arrived, they found that her 4 children were shot. They were inside the car. 2 children were dead, a 13-year-old boy and 3-year-old girl. 2 other children were injured. They are now in stable condition. They are 8 years old and 9 years old. Deputies say that it's unclear if Romelus fired the gunshots in this gas station's parking lot, or did she allegedly do it somewhere else. Surveillance video allegedly shows her getting out of the car, getting gas, talking on her phone before deputies arrive. Authorities say they believe the gunshots were fired inside the car, but other than that, a lot of this is still a mystery. At a news conference on Sunday, law enforcement would not share too much detail. Here's part of what they said per Fox 26 in Houston.
We've been burning the midnight oil on this ever since this dropped, right? So I can assure you we're looking into this.
But then we received the court documents that have shown what Romelus allegedly told detectives after they took her into custody. Now, according to these court records, Romelus was asked whether she wanted to continue talking with authorities, and she said yes. Now, at first, when she was asked why she called 911, she said she couldn't talk about it. But when she was asked again about calling 911, she allegedly said, quote, "Instead of them doing it to me, I'm going to do it to them." Then, when the investigator asked, quote, "Do what?" Romelus allegedly said, quote, "Kill them all." Romelus then said she didn't call 911. She allegedly said she called, quote, "the devil." As Romelus continued talking, she said that she was ready to work, which detectives write in the court document that it just didn't make sense. Romelus did allegedly say that she had 4 children and said their names and their ages correctly, but when asked where they were, she allegedly said, quote, "the devil." When asked what she meant by that, she said, quote, "they're dead," and quote, "'cause you can't take me without me taking you." Now, at their news conference, deputies would not discuss anything related to the custody of the children or the family situation involving these children before the shooting. But we have learned that the question of paternity with at least one of these children, it has been raised before. In fact, it was raised very publicly on a TV show called Paternity Court. The episode is still public on YouTube. Now, the episode was about learning who the father was of an 18-month-old boy. Now, it is unclear if that child is one of the victims in this case, but his age does match up with the age of the 13-year-old who was killed. That boy found slumped over inside the car, according to deputies when they arrived at that gas station. Before I get back to this episode of On the Case, which is one of the most watched shows on YouTube, I need to stop and talk about our partner, Morgan & Morgan. We're talking about America's largest injury law firm with more than 1,000 attorneys and a history of winning. And they win a lot. They've recovered over $25 billion from more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. Now, even if you don't think your case is worth millions of dollars, why not fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so easy to start a claim. You can do it with just 8 clicks on your phone. So if you've been injured and you need to start a claim, go to www.forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also scan this QR code on your screen or click the link below. We also found an Instagram page that appears to show Romelus posting content as recently as September 27th. Now, this is the post on that day in September. The video has the caption, quote, "Mama gotta have a life too." And here's the caption on the post that reads, quote, "'Cause what it really do, you're not a bad B word if you're a terrible mother. To all my mamainas handling biz and did not handle biz this week, baby go to happy hour, bleep them kids." Deputies say they are investigating the home where Romelus and her kids lived, which was more than an hour away north of Houston in Montgomery County, Texas. It is still unclear why Romelus and her children inside that vehicle were in the county south of Houston, again, an hour away Saturday morning when she called 911 allegedly. Romelus is now facing 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Bond is set at $5 million each for each murder count and $2 million for each aggravated assault count for a total of $14 million. Law enforcement would not speculate on a motive in this case. We still don't know that. KHOU-TV is reporting that CPS has made contact with Romelus in the past, but the details of that interaction has not been made public. Now, as far as any sort of criminal record for Romelus, this mugshot is from 2022, and it was for an arrest in Georgia in Fayette County. It was related to a DUI, possession of marijuana, failure to maintain lane, and having an improper tag. Court records show that she pleaded guilty to the DUI and improper tag charges, and prosecutors decided not to pursue the 2 other charges she was facing. Joining us now to talk more about this from Texas is Anthony Asso, criminal defense attorney and a former assistant district attorney. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. I know this is an incredibly sad case. Just initially from what we've learned, and there isn't a lot from deputies, but what do you just take away about the evidence that it seems that they have to this point?
Well, I think it's largely that they're relying on the 911 phone call as well as probably interviews from the 2 children that survived the shooting, which, while eyewitness interviews are typically strong testimony, it's her own children. So I think that they're going to really want to work to build up more evidence that will corroborate the testimony of those 2 other children.
Yeah, and the 2 children who survived, I mean, they're both minors. How do you go about, I mean, from, the prosecution standpoint of making sure that you have a story that you could use in court, considering these kids are so young? I believe they're 8 and 9 years old who survived.
Well, you want to find, in addition to testimonial evidence, you're going to want to look for all the direct physical evidence that could corroborate what happened, right? So they're going to be looking at the shell casings on the scene. My understanding is that these shootings occurred at a gas station. So we're going to want to look for surveillance video to find out if there's any footage that will corroborate the child witnesses' statements. Because not only are they young witnesses, but they're also the children of the defendant in this case. And so in addition to all the emotional trauma that they're dealing with right now, when it comes down to time to potentially testify in some sort of trial setting, their emotions and feelings could be kind of up in the air.
She's being held on a $14 million bond. And I know in a lot of states, and typically you don't see bond that high.
No.
How does it work in Texas where someone could actually be, and I know they broke it down with the 2 murder charges are $5 million apiece, and then the 2 aggravated assault charges with a deadly weapon, I believe it was, are $2 million apiece, bringing it to 14. How does that work in Texas?
Well, in just like any other state, Texas has to abide by the Constitution. So you can't use bail in order to oppress somebody, and everyone's entitled to bail. However, in Texas, if they put on a proof evident hearing, and I think we could anticipate that there could be a capital murder charge in this case. We don't have that much information yet, but in the event that Brazoria does file capital murder, and they did intend to seek death in this case, they could have a proof evident hearing and ultimately hold the defendant at no bond. But without doing that, and just on murder charges, she's entitled to bail. And I do think that amount is high, so we'll likely see her defense attorneys file a writ in an effort to lower the bond. Still, I imagine that the bonds will be out of reach for her in these cases.
Because, and still, I mean, we haven't learned a lot about what exactly links her to this shooting. Deputies have said that they believe it happened in the car. They're still figuring out exactly where. They were asked about the murder weapon. It was unclear whether they actually have that. When it comes to a bond hearing in the short term, I mean, what would be the argument that a defense attorney could have to try and lower her bond? And also the other part of it is, what's the point of even lowering it if it would be an amount over $1 million that she might not be able to afford?
Sure. I think it's just, regardless, it's your responsibility as her lawyer to get the bond as low as possible in an effort to try and help her make that bond. Putting together a defense is going to be a lot more successful if you're able to communicate with your client. And the reality is if your client is in custody, that's harder. It's harder to have communication with them. I think the arguments that the defense will likely make are that she's got no criminal history, and I think that they'll probably argue her financial means in this case. But with the facts, as far as from what we've seen so far, I think the prosecution will just rely on the facts, and it wouldn't surprise me if the judge didn't budge on the bail amount in this case.
You read through some of the court documents, and she made some very bizarre, scary statements, saying things like her children are with the devil. She said, kill them all. You know, on one hand, that could be very incriminating, but on the other hand, you would look and say that this isn't someone who maybe is in the right state of mind. How does the law see a statement like that of whether an insanity defense could be coming?
Yeah, Chris, so the law in Texas, when it comes to insanity, basically states that you have to establish that the person wasn't aware of the consequences of their actions. So they really couldn't process what they were doing at the time that the offense was committed. It's a really high standard, and you don't often see successful insanity defenses. They do occur, but it's definitely the exception to the rule. So I think statements like that are something that the defense at least would tip the defense off to explore in this case, especially when we're talking about first-degree murder charges or potentially capital murder, where a defendant faces life without parole in prison. The defense has to explore every single avenue, whether that's is she the person that actually committed the offense? Was she acting in self-defense, or did she do it, but was she insane at the time and unable to process what was going on? So I think we'll certainly see the defense explore that avenue in this case.
What would be the point where the defense could actually make that argument? Because it's one thing that she makes these statements in spur of the moment. I haven't seen anything that she's had any sort of history with mental health in the past. Maybe she has an undiagnosed disorder that could explain some of this activity. How does both the prosecution and defense kind of explore that and figuring out whether that would be a viable defense for her?
Well, the first line for the defense in this case is going to be obtaining an expert to have her evaluated and to look at the facts and look at the overall investigation in this case, because they're not going to be able to establish that she was acting out of insanity if they don't have an expert testify to that effect. You've got to then notify the state if you intend to use that kind of evidence in a trial. So I imagine the state would have their own expert to conduct a similar evaluation. To counter that, I think the prosecution is likely going to rely on the circumstances surrounding the shooting in this case, right? The fact that Ms. Romelus left the scene is going to be something that they would rely upon to say, look, you fled in an effort to avoid getting in trouble, which goes so that you had recognition of the consequences of your actions. So it's sort of the circumstances surrounding the shooting that I think the state will heavily rely on.
If it was found, and I'm just thinking off the top, say she's schizophrenic and she's never known that she was schizophrenic, and they find through this evaluation that she is. I mean, what's the bar still, even if that was the case? What makes the bar so high to actually use an insanity defense?
Well, you could rely, I mean, the schizophrenic, her suffering from schizophrenia could be probative for the defense, but it's a matter of tying that in to this instant offense and showing that due to that schizophrenic episode, that the defendant couldn't process what they were doing. And so you have to create that nexus. And I think that's what makes the bar so high here. I think finding an expert to testify to say, hey, look, a lot of people won't say schizophrenia could lead to that, or could lead to you not recognizing what's going on. So it's having an evaluation that shows that, in fact, she didn't realize what she was doing at the time she shot her two children. So I think that's what creates a high bar.
And even beyond that, because if they file capital murder charges and say they seek the death penalty in this case because she shot 4 kids allegedly, killing 2 of them, on the flip side of it, let's say she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Like, what would life look like for her? And I know we're getting way ahead of ourselves of where we are in this, but just thinking that one possibility could eventually be the death penalty, what would be on the flip side of that if the insanity defense actually worked out?
Yeah, that's a good question, Chris, because I think there's a general assumption that someone would then just walk free. And the reality is they don't. There's a structured period of time where when somebody's found not guilty by reason of insanity, that they can still, they're incarcerated, but they're typically in a state mental hospital until there's a restoration of their sanity and competency. So you don't just walk away from that without any sort of, I wouldn't use the word punishment, but ongoing treatment for whatever mental illness you were struggling with at the time. But I do think, whether or not they can mount an insanity defense, I do think if there was any mental health, that's something the defense would use in an effort to sort of mitigate whatever offer she might receive from the state before a trial ever occurred in this case.
And I know that you've worked cases in this county. In a case like this, if they do have the evidence that they believe that they have, or at least that they've kind of insinuated to us that they've had, that seems like they have a pretty strong case. I mean, how likely is it that prosecutors would offer a deal down the line if it's something where it seems like she would get the death penalty for this?
Well, assuming that they have the facts they need to make this case and there's not anything to support that she was acting out of any mental health episode, I think they're going to be really hard pressed to get any sort of offer. The defense would be hard pressed to get any sort of offer that would resolve this case. I imagine that there's going to be long sentences. I mean, I think we could see, and if they were to file a capital murder charge, we could easily see an offer of life without parole or a life sentence offering in this case. And so under those circumstances, it typically leads to trials.
And so I know you work in Houston, and she lives in Montgomery County, which just looking at a map is north of the city, and then Brazoria County is south of Houston. It seems like these are, just in terms of trying to figure out exactly what happened. I mean, they say call 911 around 5 o'clock in the morning Saturday. She's at this gas station south of the city, very far away from where she lives. Just the geographic part of this, as someone who lives in Houston, what stands out to you?
Well, it's odd. I think the time of day, obviously, at that hour being, because Montgomery County and Brazoria County, specifically where Miss Romelus lived, that's about an hour and a half to an hour 45 minutes away. So she's at a random gas station at 5:30 in the morning with all of her kids in the back seat. It's definitely, I see investigators wanting to find out more about why she was down there. And the way they're going to do that, I think, will be through cell phone examination. So they'll probably get a warrant to search that phone and talk to witnesses that knew more about her life.
And then just if I think of the defense attorney that's going to get this case, and let's say the mental health argument, the insanity defense is just not there. How do you approach this case with her and defend someone if the prosecution, it seems that they feel like they have a pretty strong case that they have the person responsible for what happened to these kids?
Well, it's hard to say what specifically a defense lawyer is going to do without knowing the entirety of the investigation. But there's a lot of things they'll probably want to harp in on. They're going to want to listen to the statement of the 2 other children. They're going to want to look at the crime scene and look to see whether whether the investigation was conducted properly. Were chain of custodies, when it comes to the ballistics on scene, done properly? Did they do DNA in this case? And just when you look at the big picture, trying to find the holes in the investigation where the police didn't do their job like they're supposed to. I think that would be a start. I also think that there might not be mental health issues, but there's certainly things that you could look back on and try to find about Ms. Romelus that might mitigate why she did this, right? So you're going to want to look at her childhood and kind of dig back every layer of her life to see if there's things in her life that were traumatic that might lead her to act or respond in a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, you just look at this reality television show and to just think of, you know, the place that someone would be to even go on a show like that. And you know, is that kind of the story that a defense could tell eventually when we get down the line? If this were to go to trial, just knowing how, you know, I know you've done work in this county. So this happens on Saturday, October 4th. Now it's Tuesday, so it's been a couple days. I mean, what would trial time look like to actually get to a trial from here?
The wheels of justice turn slow, Chris. And
Yeah.
especially in Houston and surrounding counties, just because there's a big population. So I don't foresee this case going to trial within the next year and a half. I think more likely we're looking at 2. And especially when it comes to murder cases and a murder of a child, there are going to be boatloads of discovery. I don't think the investigation stops once the suspect is found. I think that now police officers are likely or should be writing warrants again to get into electronics that belong to her to try and establish motive and understand why it is that she did what she did. So in the event that the defense makes some sort of mental insanity argument or that there was mental health and she wasn't really acting like herself, they can say, no, look, this is a motive that she had going into the shooting that day. I can't say whether or not that evidence exists, but I think that this investigation will be ongoing for quite some time.
Yeah, I know that law enforcement there in that county have said that they're burning the midnight oil, trying to figure out exactly how this could happen. Horrific case. Anthony Asso, criminal defense attorney, thank you for taking the time to be with us on Law and Crime. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.